Welcome to Bookies Chicago. I am in the Chicago location of Bookies bookstores right now. There are stores in Bookies in Chicago and in Homewood, Illinois. My name is Keith, and I'm happy to have with us author Vern Smith today. He just released a brand new book on July 1st, which you can see behind me under the table. And it's all about a payroll heist on a Hollywood North TV shoot set. It takes place in 1989 and it's put out by Run Amok Books. Steve Venwright says it is a blast. And Vern, welcome to Bookies.
Thanks very much, Keith. It's great to be back, even if just virtually. I do miss trolling your shop and trolling bookshops in general. So it's been a tough year, but not just as a customer. Writers, publishers, and bookstores have certainly had a tough time, and we're all in this together. I'm greatly relieved and pleased that you're still with us, and I'm always checking during this time to see that everybody's still with us. Can you give me an idea of some of the things that customers have done, particularly at Bookies, to keep our great indie brick and mortar bookstore brick and mortar? In other words, what have they been doing to support Bookies, and what can they do to support Bookies?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, well, in the early parts of the pandemic, there were a lot of authors that were putting things out on Twitter about, as we were leading up to all the closures, there were some that basically said, if you want to see your bookstore open, you need to go there now, and you need to get some books, because I have a feeling they're going to be closed for a while. And sure enough, very soon after that, we were closed down from March, like middle of March, all the way until the end of August. And that did a lot of damage. But one of the things that happened is we had actually big crowds of people braving COVID before we knew much about it to come out and stock up on books and to try and support me as they could. While we were closed, I considered myself an essential business, and I did stay open for curbside pickup, where I didn't require any of my employees to come in. It was just me coming to the store, and I was going between the two stores every day, spending a couple hours at one, couple hours at another, fulfilling orders and making sure that people had things to read. One of the things that people did was they ordered gift cards. And some of them have told me since then they have absolutely no plans to use these gift cards ever. And there was one gentleman who's from the Chicago neighborhood who literally bought $1,000 in gift cards.
Wow.
And I do believe he's planning to use them for Christmas. But there are some people who bought just these big gift cards just to support the store and said they weren't going to use them. We actually did also run a t-shirt fundraiser. There were two different companies, one local and one somewhere else that basically helped us with selling t-shirts and fulfilling those orders and basically splitting the money with us. But they gave us a format to sell these t-shirts. They would take a whole bunch of orders and then send out the t-shirt. They'd print them, whatever they had orders for, and send them out to people. And so I had some specific Chicago and Homewood designs, and that went pretty well and helped a lot at a time when I really needed it.
It's my understanding that the Bink Foundation has also stepped up and made an investment in Bookies Homewood and Bookies Chicago, and by extension, the Homewood and Chicago communities. Can you tell folks a little bit about how Bink aids and abets indie bookstores such as Bookies, particularly at this time?
Well, I mean, overall, I've known about Bink since I've been in the business, and Bink stands for the Book Industry Charitable Foundation, and basically they are a charity, and what they do is they get people to donate, and they run this charity. And if something happens in the book selling world to an owner or even simply someone on staff, they'll swoop in and help in any way they can. And every once in a while, they do have grants, such as the one that Bookies was awarded recently. This one was called the Survive to Thrive grant, and 99 different bookstores basically split $1.1 million. And
Wow.
so, I mean, some got, the vast majority got $10,000 grants, and others got $7,500 grants. But and these grants were filled by companies like Ingram, which is a wholesaler of books. And I unfortunately don't know everybody who donated to it, but thank you to all of these people. You have no idea how much you've helped. There were a lot of authors, and even I, frankly, donated to the fund. I mean, I only put in $50, but it added to the pot, and some author matched it, actually. So I didn't even know at that point I was going to get it. But yeah, authors and industry professionals and publishers and distributors all donated to this, and we're able to make these grants possible. And basically, I had to explain what I was going to do with it. And since the grant came in, one of the things that I've decided to do was open up one more day a week. We've had to adjust our hours at the store. And unfortunately, I used to be open 10 to 7 every day, both stores, fully staffed. But well, a lot changed. And unfortunately, I've had to be open only 5 days a week. We've been closed Sundays and Mondays, but starting next week, we're going to be open again on Mondays. And I've actually hired a person at each store recently to fill out that staff a little bit more in case people need a break or a vacation. And so honestly, it is Bink that made that happen. And
That's
so really happy and very thankful.
No, that's great to hear. It's very community minded, and it's selfishly as a book person, it's important to me, and certainly for the writing, publishing, and book selling community beyond. It's great to hear that there's something so community minded going on during this very difficult time.
Yeah, and it really has been. I mean, to be honest, putting it out there, we at this point things are getting back to normal, kind of, and we're making, like, this past month was double the sales of this time last year, but it's still half the sales of the year before. And so it's still a struggle as people are just starting to come out, and it's important to keep going. And it's important to have bookstores in your community, and there frankly aren't enough of them. There aren't enough bookstores around.
No, they're not. When I first moved here, you were just in Chicago, and then shortly after I moved here, you came into Homewood, and it was as a book person, and I'm a reader first. It's incredibly important to me that you're here, and I know it's incredibly important to some of my neighbors as well. So it's great to hear that Bink has stepped up, and it's great to hear that customers have stepped up as well.
Yeah, and I will say, believe it or not, they have their issues, but I will say that there are several governments from the nation all the way down through the state and the county and the city that all actually stepped up as well and helped out a lot.
Great to hear.
Yeah. So should we get to talking about your book?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for asking those questions of my store. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody. So you decided to set this novel in 1989. It's an interesting year, and I mean, I remember it, but I don't remember everything about it. But you sure seem to. Was it just aesthetic to set it in 1989, or was there a real reason for going to that time period?
Well, it was entirely tactical, but once we satisfied the tactical, I sure had a lot of fun with the aesthetic. Um, the key here, and the thing that made me pick that time specifically, is January 1st, 1989. The U.S. Free Trade Agreement comes. The U.S. Canada Free Trade Agreement comes into effect. And essentially, that created a lot of border opening loopholes for American productions to come over to Canada, tax credits, tax breaks, that sort of thing. And so it created didn't create Hollywood North, but it certainly created a new aspect of Hollywood North, and made it bigger, made a small industry bigger. And so you suddenly had a great number of people working in that industry, who had little or no experience. And that is something that generally leads to questionable standards, or standards not being upheld. And if I was going to have a payroll heist on a television shoot, I sort of needed an out of control shoot to do that, and that paved the way. Also, it's a payroll heist, so I'm dealing with cash, and so I actually could have done it around the turn of the century, and that was still going on. But I felt the further I went back, the more plausible it was for people to be paid in cash. And so between the two things, 1989 became the date. It's the summer of 1989. Free trade's been in effect for approximately 6 months as of the time of my novel. And my television shoot for Made in Canada, American production, is sure out of control. And as I said, that's what paves the way for the payroll heist.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, the Hollywood North culture, it's really interesting, because one of the things that I noticed while reading was it's kind of hard to explain, but I do a lot of readings about cultures with which I am not familiar. And so I find it interesting to learn about what life is like in Botswana, and what the people are like in Calcutta, India, and all of these different things. And you really seem to delve into something that was absolutely foreign to me in so many ways. I thought it was really interesting how different just the way the dialogue, and just the way things like brought themselves out in that particular way. I thought it was really pretty interesting. It just had that feeling like I was reading so much about people who were not like me, in a lot of ways. But anyway, so yeah, Jill, you touch on the Hollywood North culture, and this is you had some experience with this, and it really came out. You really seem to delve into this quite a bit. You were a production assistant. You were also an editor and a writer, and at Canadian Screenwriter magazine. So, how much did those things inform you while you were writing Under the Table?
Hugely. The being a production assistant was pivotal. Because that introduced me to an aspect of it, particularly payroll, that I was not familiar with, despite the fact that I was writing for Canadian Screenwriter magazine and editing for that. The first day at work as a production assistant, a couple handfuls of us went to a bar at the end of work, and we were sitting around shooting the breeze, and somebody informed me that we'd be getting paid cash. That the day after the last day of shooting, we would all report to the same address, and we would pick up envelopes of cash. So what it meant is there was going to be this great big bucket of cash in one place at one time. There were about 35 of us that knew, and so all of our husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, everybody knew, and there wasn't much by way of security. And I knew that that would be the case. And so, I sort of looked left and looked right and said, so nobody's ever robbed the place before. And somebody said no. And in that moment, I very much decided, well, I'm going to write about this because it was the perfect grounds I felt for a payroll heist. And that was pivotal. And that was something I probably wouldn't have picked up while I was working for the magazine, Canadian Screenwriter. That said, that introduced me to the minutia of film and TV culture in Canada, and so that's why I know a fair bit about how the free trade agreement of 1989 affected the industry, how it made it bigger. That's how I know what everybody's jobs are, except a grip. I've actually never figured out exactly what a grip does, and we do touch upon that in the book. But I figured out everybody's jobs and what they do, and sort of the minutia of film and television culture. And between the two things, by the time I sat down and got to writing, I felt I really had a good foundation of sort of the industry from a couple of perspectives. And so both of those things very much informed my work here. I don't know that I could have done it with one but not the other. And when I'm visiting a set as a writer for a magazine, the treatment is completely different than being a grunt on a half-assed TV shoot. And so, combining those two things gave me a solid foundation to be at least something of a lay expert. And so I went from there.
Okay. Yeah, you seem to come off as a lay expert in 80s music as well.
Well, that would be true.
Yeah. So yeah, it's all about 80s new wave for me. But so what about the music? So the characters spend a lot of time like talking about and arguing about music and that kind of thing. It was interesting reading it because I was trying to like peg you down and see if I can figure out like what you were into and that kind of stuff. But it was all over the place. I mean, there were some deep cuts that were mentioned in there, like Generation X and I noticed, and a couple others, but and it ranged into pop music and that kind of thing too, talking about Whitney Houston and some other things. And so how central to the plot was the 80s music?
Very much so. I mean, there's times where it's an aesthetic, but there's also times when it's clearly central to the plot, particularly the Cyrus character's obsession with Billy Idol. But as you say, it's all over the place, as the 80s were. I mean, we talk about some great music, things from Rational Youth, things from Generation X, like you mentioned. We also talk about Taylor Dane and Kenny G and some other things that are not in my music snob collection. But music drives the characters, and the characters drive the plot. And one of the things that I tried to do with this is illustrate characters' conflicts and mismatches through their music. There's at one point about 3/4 of the way through the novel when it's just the night before they're going to pull this heist, and two of the characters, Nathan, the parking attendant, and Claire, the rent-a-cop, have sort of roughly become boyfriend girlfriend, but their relationship is somewhat rocky, and they get into an argument about the music that's being played at the end party, the rap party, and song by the Violent Femmes comes on, Kiss Off, and Claire says words to the effect of, eight, I forget what eight was for, stupid, the guy doesn't even know his own words, and they put out the record like that. And you know, an argument ensues because Nathan's very much a Violent Femmes fan, and thinks the world of Gordon Gano. And it's not to say, I certainly have my side, my opinion in there, but it's not to say that this character is right and this character is wrong. It's to say that there's a disconnect between them, and they probably shouldn't be intimately together in the first place. And I think it illustrates as well that they probably shouldn't be pulling this heist together. And so that's one of the ways in which I've tried to deploy 80s music. It's not a lovin' for 80s music. Nathan does touch upon the fact round about that section that there was a lot of objectively bad music made during the decade, Starships, We Built This City topping out. But there was also some great music made during that decade. And so we try to weed through it and pick out good from bad. But like anything else, it's a matter of taste. And while I don't care for Kenny G, there were obviously a lot of people who did, and it's part of the decade. And so that's why it's there.
Right. There was actually I can't recall it right now, but there was actually a Kenny G reference in there while he was playing music, while he was playing some Kenny G music that actually made me laugh out loud. I cannot remember the line, but
you were playing Kenny G music.
Oh, is that what it was?
No, I'm asking. You said.
Oh gosh, no. One of the characters was playing Kenny G.
I figured that was it.
Yeah.
I know from the music in your store, the fabulous reggae in your store. I didn't have you pegged for a Kenny G man.
Nope, definitely not. Definitely not. Okay, last thing, and then I hope you'll be able to do a reading for us. So in both the Green Ghetto, which you can see, actually, I had to have my son run my advance copy over because we actually sold out here in Chicago.
That's good to hear.
Of this one. And so in your first novel, The Green Ghetto, and also Under the Table, there's a lot of references to drag, and there's some drag culture. So how have drag performers informed your work?
Well, I moved to Toronto in '86, and my first address was at the corner of Gerrard and Church, which probably doesn't mean anything to people outside of Toronto. But right away, it became very normal, for there to be drag queens, drag kings, and otherwise drag performers, gender non-conforming people in my neighborhood. So, it got to the point, particularly with this, that it would be very hard for me to write a novel about the core of Toronto without having drag in it. And it just, very much became part of the reality. And there wasn't one queen or one scene. We could go get really cheap draft at a piano bar where an elderly queen would be singing show tunes, or there'd be something a little bit more flamboyant at another bar, or just on the street. And one of the things that I came to realize was drag is about many things. It's about identity, it's about alter ego, and it can also be an art form and something that's based in burlesque, And I think that a lot of, as an art form, if it's any good, it's probably going to elicit a response. And it's one of the things I used in here, in Under the Table, that I'm going to read from in a moment, to do just that. At that time in history, particularly with the HIV and AIDS crisis, there was a lot of blaming and shaming and grouping people together, and making them the problem, making them responsible, a lot of stereotyping. And when drag starts coming to the TV shoot, the star of the show, who's also the showrunner and head writer, Abel Otto, starts bringing queens into the show. And while his deployment of drag is at sometimes very cynical, what's really important and central to the plot here and central to the characters here is the queens do elicit a response, and they do. It's a somewhat ugly response, but the response is very much reflective of the things I just mentioned: the blaming, the naming, the shaming, and the grouping. And I'm going to do a quick reading, I hope, that sort of illustrates that point before we send everybody home. Revisiting religion, again, Abel was decked out in a robe, wearing a bald skull cap and peddling Pope on a rope for $10.99. All folks watching from home had to do was call 1-800-THE-POPE and have their credit cards ready. At $21.99, there was the Pope VHS, a cassette VHS combo called The Pope Does 80 A cassette VHS combo called The Pope Does 80s Ladies was $39.99, and state-of-the-art Christians could add $10 for the CD, something that would last as long as their love of Christ, forever. Abel, as John Paul II, started the medley with the Whitney Houston from Colby's. She did a solid I Want to Dance with Somebody. After that, it was She Bop with a Cyndi Lauper from the Tuft Agency. Vanity was slated to play herself, but she was saying she wouldn't be back because of the used condom in the green room. Without approval, Abel reached out to the Whitney Houston. She knew a Vanity from the Boom Boom Room who happily made a pretty mess. The Vanity, in turn, knew a Madonna from Comrades, so Like a Prayer made sense. Better, the Madonna was friends with a Cher from La Cage aux Folles on Yonge Street, and yes, she had the new hit down. So Abel recruited her too. Now she was lip syncing to If I Could Turn Back Time. If there was ever a thread, Arlene figured it had been lost on one of Abel's trips. See, she did know where they were coming from. But surely, what with John Paul II dancing and singing with actual drag queens, the line into oblivion had been crossed. Watching from the back row of metal bleachers, Arlene hit the talk button on her walkie. Arlene for Veronica. Go for Veronica. Go to 10. After they both did like so, Arlene said she couldn't believe Veronica greenlit this. Making fun of Tammy Faye Baker was one thing. With the downfall of PTL, Tammy didn't have a reputation to defame. So fine, fair game, even if Abel took it one toke over the line. But the Pope Does 80s Ladies? Really? Was Veronica all there? Abel was on stage dressed like the Pope, dancing and singing about female masturbation and male ejaculate with chicks with dicks. Did Veronica understand the connotations, the ramifications? This wasn't just sacrilege. This was drug behavior. Everyone on stage was clearly on drugs. Whoever wrote it, also on drugs. And talk about HIV. Everybody up there was plausibly positive as well. Abel, too, the way he was cavorting with cross-dressers, none of which was funny. Better than that fat joke you wrote in, Veronica said. What percentage of the states did CNN say was obese? This, Arlene said, pointing down from above, was not palatable. It was cultural pornography, shock jock excrement. Advertisers would see this as a slap in the face to innocent AIDS victims like Ryan White and put their money behind Jerry Seinfeld, someone who could represent. And did Veronica see Jerry's pilot last night? No. Well, she should have, because there was something to be learned. Even if it was rough, it was palatable. As a creative person herself, a writer who graduated at the top of her class, Arlene said she wanted to make dramas, something edgy, a thriller, or perhaps a production of the script she wrote during her graduating year, an A- about the human condition. Thing was, even when they made these projects in Canada, they almost always used American production companies. Comedy, that was pretty much all Hollywood North was trusted with for now. So long as that was the state of things, it was never a good idea to defecate where one feasted. But look at the audience, Veronica said. They were loving it, probably a little turned on. Oh, they loved it, sure. Arlene closed her eyes, saying of course they loved it, that they were toque-wearing hosers who only went to things because they were free. They probably laughed at their own belches, discussing flavors. Oh, that one is ketchupy. What did Meckler call them? Oh yes, eaters and poopers. That is why they are in our audience laughing on cue. They do not have jobs, money, or even a plan. Frick the audience. It is crap like this that gets you admonished, banned.
All right. And that was Vern Smith reading from his new novel, Under the Table, just came out July 1st. We are fully stocked at both Chicago and Homewood locations. So definitely come on by and get a signed first edition copy of the book, and probably have some of his previous works, The Gimmick and The Green Ghetto, in stock. At least in Homewood, we'll have a copy of The Green Ghetto. We'll have to talk to Run Amok about getting some more copies of that one. Anyway, so well, thank you very much for that reading, and thank you to Bink for the generous grant, and for all the people who donated to Bink and made that possible. They made more than they probably know possible. Anyway, if there's anything else that you wanted to say.
No, I just wanted to thank you for having me, Keith, and I also wanted to thank Bink for helping you, because you are in Bookies Homewood and Bookies Chicago as well, a community institution. It's important to me that you're here. It's important to a lot of people that you're here. It's important that we do have a strong indie bookstore in town. So thank you to Bink for aiding and abetting you. It's meaningful to us as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and if anybody wants to donate to them, they are at binkfoundation.org. BINC is how you spell Bink, by the way. Anyway, and well, thank you very much.
Thank you.